Thank you, Tony, AGM President, distinguished delegates. It's a great honour to be invited to your AGM here today, and I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to IATA member airlines and to you, Tony Tyler, to give us an opportunity to address you for the first time in the 70-year history of IATA and the 40-year history of CITES. There is a significant amount of wildlife and wildlife products that are legitimately transported every year. And many of these are transported by air, and we've enjoyed a long-standing and a very beneficial relationship with IATA, in particular as it relates to CITES requirements for the live transport of animals and of plants. However, I'm here today, as Tony said, to talk to you about the social, environmental and economic impacts of illegal trade in wildlife. And that is wildlife that is traded contrary to the requirements of CITES. I'll also address how criminals are transporting their contraband by making use of air transport and what additional measures could be taken by the air transport sector to assist in combating this illegal wildlife trade. A few things about CITES. It is a legally binding international agreement. We have 181 parties to the convention, and we set the international rules for trade in wildlife. We currently regulate international trade in over 35,000 species of plants and animals, their parts and derivatives. And the nature of the various trade measures that are used by the Convention to regulate this trade is primarily determined by the biological status of the species. International commercial trade in wild-taken specimens of some species are prohibited. Some examples: elephant ivory, rhino horn, great apes, tigers, and marine turtles. There are other species where specimens can be legally traded, subject to strict regulatory requirements to ensure they are not overexploited. Some examples of that: python and alligator skins, the bark of the African cherry tree, the wool of the vicuña, and the meat of the queen conch, which I understand may be eaten in this part of the United States. This legal and sustainable trade can have benefits both for the species and for people. However, as Tony said, over recent years, what we have been experiencing is a surge in the illegal trade of wildlife, in particular as it affects the African elephant, rhino, the pangolin, which I'll explain in a moment, and certain timber species. This illegal trade is global in nature and it's industrial in scale. We are increasingly being confronted by transnational organised criminal gangs, by rebel militia groups, and by rogue elements of the military, who are driving this industrial scale poaching for illicit markets, and they are using the proceeds for all manner of criminal activities. This dynamic has been well recognised by the UN Security Council, by the UN Crime Commission, by Interpol, and many others, including the World Customs Organization that was referred to this morning. There are considerable scaled-up efforts underway to combat this illegal trade, but it continues to be a worldwide problem. Some estimate the annual value of this illegal trade at over $20 billion per year. That ranks it alongside other transnational organised crimes, such as the trafficking in persons and in arms. Let me share with you just 3 examples of illegal trade to give you a sense of the scale of the trade that is going on. The poaching of African elephants and the illegal trade in their ivory is perhaps one of the most noticeable and destructive forms of wildlife crime. In just 3 years, between 2010 and 2012, an estimated 100,000 African elephants were slaughtered for their ivory. In some regions, such as Central Africa, they are at imminent South Africa is a great conservation success story, mainly due to the efforts of the South Africans. However, this conservation success story is now under severe threat. Back in 2007, there were only 13 rhino that were poached in South Africa, and that number has been steadily increasing up until last year, 2014, 1,215 white rhino were slaughtered for their horn in South Africa alone. And these crimes are not only affecting iconic species such as the elephant and the rhino, they're affecting lesser-known species such as the pangolin. It's sought after for its scales and its meat, and in just one seizure by customs, they took 10 tons of pangolin meat, and that's equivalent to someone of my weight times 130. In overall terms, there are now less than 24,000 rhino left in Africa, less than 3,000 in Asia. The last rhino in Vietnam was lost in 2011. The last known rhino in Mozambique was lost in 2013, both to poachers. And if you look at this picture in the middle of the slide, the ranger holding the gun, he is protecting the last male northern white rhino on the planet. And it is being protected by armed rangers 24/7. There are now around 3,200 wild tigers left, about 800 mountain gorillas left in the wild, and they were profiled recently in the brilliant documentary Virunga. And to put these numbers in some sort of human context, the Sun Life Stadium here in Miami, I understand, has a capacity of 65,000. That's 2 times the number of rhino found on the entire planet and 20 times the number of wild tigers left on the planet. Distinguished delegates, we are quite literally down to the wire with a number of these species. We are facing a critical situation, a crisis that needs us to intervene immediately, otherwise they are going to be lost on our watch. But the impact of this illegal trade is not just on the wildlife itself, it is also affecting people, their livelihoods, national economies, and in some parts of Africa, national and regional security. Rangers are being killed in the front line. About 1,000 have been killed over the last 10 years. Officials are being corrupted. Local communities are being deprived of the opportunity to develop their own wildlife resources the way they may choose to. And many countries rely upon wildlife-based tourism to generate significant revenue and jobs, both at a national and at a local level. And in some countries, it forms a major part of their GDP, such as in Kenya. Magnificent wildlife destinations are being plundered by poachers for the illegal trade, including UNESCO World Heritage Sites across the African continent, such as the Selous Reserve in the United Republic of Tanzania, which has just been put on the World Heritage in Danger list given the scale of poaching of elephants and other animals in that park. Against this backdrop, there are significant global efforts underway, both in source, transit, and destination countries, addressing demand and supply. We are fortunate to live in an interconnected world, something you know better than any of us. There are today over 1.1 billion tourist arrivals a year. We've heard again this morning there are 100,000 flights a day. There are 500 million shipping containers going around the planet every year. But legitimate forms of transport are being exploited by transnational organised criminals and others to transport their contraband. As your Environment Committee has noted in its report to this meeting, this can pose a safety risk to airline staff and passengers, and it also gives rise to potential legal, financial and reputational risk. Illegal rhino horn and pangolin scales are primarily illegally transported by air. Illegally traded raw elephant ivory, which is the tusk, is primarily transported by sea, but the worked ivory that's being illegally traded is primarily transported by air. And I could give you many other examples if time permitted. Illegal trade, as I said, is of an industrial scale, but in the context of the volumes of air and sea cargo, we are quite often looking for a needle in a haystack, with only a tiny fraction of overall cargo and passengers actually being engaged in this illegal trade. The contraband, however, has to travel vast distances through many hands, and there are many opportunities to disrupt this illegal trade right along the illegal supply chain. And our collective objective must be to maximise the risk of trading illegally and to disrupt it at every step along the illegal supply chain. We are certainly not asking IATA members to become de facto customs or enforcement authorities. These are core functions of government. But enforcement agencies cannot operate in isolation. They require good sources of intelligence from multiple sources. And this is where the transport sector can play a key role. Distinguished delegates, you have tens of thousands of staff in the field every day dealing with customers, cargo and passengers, and you have a deep knowledge of your own cargo supply chains. Your e-freight initiative offers great opportunities to better secure legal trade by reducing the fraudulent use of permits and in detecting illegal wildlife trade. And if you, as CEOs and senior airline industry leaders, alert your staff to this issue and make it a priority of your company not to be used to carry any illegal wildlife or illegal wildlife products, then your staff can act as extra sets of eyes and ears on the ground, looking, listening, and passing on information to enforcement authorities. And this is what Sir Tim Clark of Emirates has described as street intelligence, and it is desperately needed by our enforcement authorities. Related to this is ensuring that any legitimately traded wildlife or wildlife products adhere to IATA standards and CITES requirements. Your own IATA CEO, the CEOs of Emirates and Kenya Airways, myself and many other leaders are part of a transport task force established by the Royal Foundation under the patronage of His Royal Highness, the Duke of Cambridge, Prince William. It is chaired by William Hague, the distinguished former Secretary of Foreign Affairs for the UK, and it has been tasked to look at how the transport sector can assist in combating this illegal trade. The work of the task force is not going to be completed until the end of the year, but it has identified 3 areas where you could intervene immediately. Firstly, to adopt and publicise a zero-tolerance policy on illegal trade in wildlife. Secondly, to raise the awareness of your customers, passengers and staff of the scale, nature and impacts of this illegal trade. And thirdly, to support customs and other enforcement agencies through the provision of intelligence gathered by your staff who are working on the ground. There is a global collective effort underway across countries by UN agencies, non-UN agencies, the non-government sector, philanthropic entities, and dedicated individuals across the globe to combat this illegal wildlife trade. And today we are reaching out to you to join this global effort, and we offer you our full support and that of our partners to assist you as necessary. And yesterday, your CEO and I signed the first ever MOU between CITES and IATA, which commits our 2 organisations to work even more closely together. Distinguished delegates, there are many issues on your agenda this week, and some will no doubt give rise to differing opinions and lively debate. I hope that joining this global effort to put an end to this highly destructive illegal trade is an issue that can unite you. I thank you.